Hey, my name is Heather, and my husband and I are the children's pastors here at the Father's House. Thank you. We get to hang out with all of the kids, and, I love it because our church is multi-generational, It was actually really funny. As we went into that song, Pastor Joseph, it was power, power, wonder-working power. Anybody that was in church for, their whole life and was 30 years or older was like, yes! Okay? Me and Pastor Lee looked at each other and were like, that was awesome. But something happened. It was funny. I saw it was like a new song, right? So all the kids in the front, all the younger generation, they're in it. New song, yes. And all of us older people are like, yeah, okay, I'm learning the songs. I don't know if I like this one yet, You ever, when they go, there's going to be a new song, and you're like, oh, really? And then, so the kids are up, hands in the air, and then as soon as power, power, wonder-working power, their hands go like this. And all of us were like, yes! So that's fun. That just aged me. That's good. But today we are talking about generations. We're talking about generations, and I want you to know today that if this is your first time visiting the church, we are talking about generations because we're getting ready to build a brand new building. A brand new building to house all that we believe God wants to do in this house. And the cool thing about that is that, we are so passionate about not only the next generation, right? Anytime me or Pastor Jude gets up here, we're going to be very passionate about the next generation. But today I want to talk about all of them. I want to talk about the ones that are my age, and maybe those of you that are the grandmother and grandfather generation today. And the reason I want to talk about it is because I am living proof that this church is passionate about all generations. Here's why. My parents came to the church 26 years ago, just a few months into us starting this church. So I've been here since the beginning. I was about 9 years old then, and I grew up here. I grew up in kids ministry. My parents were the children's pastors, Pastor Tim and Kim Nally. Yes, that's right. I would give them all the applause in the world. And they raised me, and I taught my very first lesson at 10 years old in kids' church. It was terrible, but I taught it at 10 years old. And then I also led worship with my mom every single weekend. And eventually I outgrew that, and I graduated into youth ministry. And there I spoke in tongues for the first time. I was filled with the Holy Spirit. And my youth pastor at the time, they decided it was cool for me to maybe teach a sermon. And again, it was terrible, but I did it for the first time, and I was able to use my gifts. Pastor Joseph at the time was like, here you go, here's a microphone, you could kind of hold a tune a little bit, why don't you sing on the worship team? And so I sang background vocals, and I still lead worship to this day, and I love it. And I got to do a lot of things, and I got to discover my gifts, I got to figure out who I was, I got to fail in a safe place, but because people believed in me, that the generation before me believed in me, and I eventually met my husband in youth ministry. Oh, right? I met my husband, and he went through what's now called Leadership College, and then we got married, and then we had kids, and we started all the way over. And now we're the kids pastors, and my kids are in kids ministry, and my daughter just graduated into youth ministry, and I hope that she doesn't find her husband anytime soon, because that would be too much for me to handle. So I am here as living proof that your pastors, your leaders believe not only in the next generation, but they are living proof that their generation took responsibility for us. Pastor Dave and Donna and all the elders years ago didn't sit down and go, hey, we need to build a church, and we need to make a lot of really awesome Christians. So we're going to do some programs, we're going to do some stuff, we're going to have this org chart, and there's going to be a really cool growth strategy. We do want more people to come to church, because more people in seats means more people not going to hell, right? So we do want that, and we want the church to grow, but the real thing is that we knew that this is a Bible-based situation here. Growing the church is generations, and if you've been around the church long enough, you've probably heard a preacher talk really low like this and talk about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay? And that's where this all begins. This thought of generations and taking care of the next generation and taking care of the next generation and taking care of the next generation and making a place for the next generation to encounter God, it all happens in the book of Genesis. We see it first. And so I'm going to briefly go over that really quick. And we're going to talk about a guy named Abraham. Anybody know Abraham? They're like, yeah, of course. Father Abraham had many sons. You're like, don't you start, okay? Father Abraham did have many sons, but he didn't at this point. God comes to Abraham in his old age, and he says, hey, buddy, I'm going to make you into a great nation. I'm going to give you a huge family. I'm going to give you all this land. It's going to be great. Isn't it great? And Abraham's like, cool, one problem. I don't have any kids. I got nothing. And so God comes and he gives him this promise in Genesis 12. He says, listen, I'm going to give you all these things, and your descendants, you won't even be able to count them. There's going to be as numerous as the stars. And then he hits him with this. All families on earth will be blessed through you. So Abraham departed as the Lord had instructed. Here's the thing. God said, Abraham, I am going to bless you. You are going to have a son, but I'm not blessing you just for you. I'm blessing you so you can bless the next generation, and so that generation can bless the next generation. You see, something happens when a generation takes responsibility for the next. Oftentimes we get like, okay, cool, we got our blessing, God. We prayed, we got everything we needed. Cool, thank you so much, God. Oh, thank you. But we forget what's really matters most. It's people. You know, I tell parents all the time that the only thing that you get to take to heaven with you is your kids. That's true. Think about it. The only thing you get to take to heaven with you is your kids. We spend so much time working on the promotion, working on getting the house, working on getting all the stuff that we need, all about us, working on our blessings, and we forget that the only thing that matters, the thing that matters most, is that when I stand before God someday, that my kids are right there next to me. That's what matters. And the reason I'm in kids ministry is because I believe so deeply in that I want all your kids standing next to me too. So my Grammy and Papa, I don't know if they made it to the service or not. They were coming. They were going to come and listen to me. But, my Grammy used to tease all the time, tease her kids. I say teasing. She'd probably be like, no, I was serious. She used to tell them, you're going to heaven whether you like it or not. Okay? So I took that stance in my parenting, and hopefully my kids will appreciate it someday. So Abraham gets this blessing. Abraham was blessed to be a blessing. So then we fast forward to the next generation. It's Isaac. Isaac is his son. He finally does get a son. God gives him a son. A lot transpires in the middle of the story, but we're going to only talk about when God comes and confirms the promise in Isaac. So he comes to Isaac and he says the same thing. He tells him, hey, I'm going to bless you. All your descendants are going to be blessed. And then he says, and through your descendants, all nations of the earth will be blessed. Again, confirming in Isaac, this isn't only for you, but then he says this, I will do this because, everybody say because Abraham listened to me and obeyed all my requirements, commands, decrees, and instructions. I want to tell you this today. Isaac doesn't receive the promise without Abraham's obedience. So without Abraham saying, yes, God, because in those verses earlier, God asked him to leave his family, leave everything that he knows and goes. And it doesn't say Abraham thought about it. It doesn't say Abraham weighed out the decision, the pros and the cons. It just says he left. He went. He obeyed. He wasn't okay with just like, hey, I'm good. I got a lot of cattle here. I'm pretty wealthy. It's okay. I'm just going to coast for the rest of my life on retirement. He decides to take a risk. He decides to sacrifice. He decides to step out and trust that God's way is the right way. And because of that, Isaac is blessed. So then we're going to fast forward again to the next generation. Next one is Jacob. So Isaac has a couple sons. Again, a lot transpired in between there, but we're going to Jacob now, and Jacob is running for his life from his brother because he kind of cheated him out of his inheritance. Little thing happened. And so he's out and he's sleeping in the wilderness. He's running for his life, and God shows up. He falls asleep and he has a dream, and he dreams of this stairway going into heaven. And God comes again to him, and he gives him the same promise of Abraham and Isaac. And he actually says this, that I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham and the God of your father Isaac. He knew that Jacob had probably heard about this promise before in his life, right? He probably knew. And then he does the whole spiel again. Your descendants, they're going to be more than you can count. And then he says, and all the families of the earth will be blessed through you. Are you catching the pattern? Through you, not just for you, but through you. And then he says this, what's more? Everybody say more. More. I am with you and I will protect you wherever you go. One day I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I finish giving you everything I've promised. We don't see that part in the other promises. So here we see that the obedience and the faithfulness of Abraham and Isaac create a space for God encounters in Jacob's life. God walks with him. For 26 years, this church has been praying for revival. We've been praying for God to come to earth in such a way that people would walk through that building without anybody ever touching a microphone. People would feel the presence of God and their lives would be changed. And that all happens because a generation takes place and takes priority and goes, hey, I'm going to make a place for the next generation, and I'm going to take my place in it, and I'm not going to sit aside and hope somebody else does it. I'm going to obey God. I'm going to show up. I'm going to pour into them. I'm going to invest into them. So today I finish with this. There is no doubt in my mind that the Father's house made me who I am today. It played a vital role in who I am and my giftings and my talents, all the things I was able to do that here. But my story really started generations ago with my grandpa on my dad's side. And I'm going to try to tell this part without crying. I told myself I wouldn't cry. But what happened is years ago, my dad's dad, my grandpa, he is one of 5 boys, and his father was an alcoholic, and all of his brothers became alcoholics, and he went through the Marine Corps, and you do a lot of that in the Marine Corps, right? But he knew of God because his mom was a Bible-preaching, believing woman that prayed over her kids. And he knew of God, and so he was off and on. And he would kind of be like, yeah, I'm living for God. I know God. And he was off and on. To hear him tell it is much better than how I'm telling it. But one day, one of his old Marine Corps buddies were in town. He said, hey, man, you want to come meet me at the bar? And he was currently at a time in his life when he was trying to live for God, trying to do it the right way. And his buddy said, hey, come meet me at the bar. And he said, hey, you know what? Instead of telling them the truth that, hey, man, I'm not really doing that anymore, he says, hey, why don't you call me in a year when you get back from your deployment, and we'll do it then. And right then and there, to hear him tell it as he's crying, tears running down his face, he says, God convicted me. He said, you're either in or you're out. And right then and there, at 22 years old, with 3 boys at the time, he would have 4, he made a decision that changed my life forever. He chose to never drink alcohol, and he broke alcoholism off my family. And none of us struggle with it. And I want to show you a picture. This is my family. These are my grandparents. There are 4 boys, all 4 of their boys are pastors. There are 11 grandchildren who are all married, serving God, either working at church or serving at church. All of those 11 grandkids had 16 great-grandkids. We've adopted people into the family. We've done all kinds of stuff. But his decision, his obedience to God all those years ago, he probably wasn't thinking about me. He probably wasn't even thinking about my kids. He just knew I had to obey God. And his obedience made a way for me to be here today. So today, I want to ask you, who are you making a place for with your obedience? How can you help make a place for the next generation? Hey, let's check out this video of another family making the same decision.
As young adults, we made basically every bad choice you could. Poor relational, financial, and health decisions. We were surrounded by community that encouraged partying and hooking up.
Becoming parents, we were aware that this lifestyle wasn't good for us or our son. The more we withdrew from the people we were spending time with, the more isolated, lonely, and helpless we felt. We became pregnant with our second son, and God began to draw us in. We moved to Vacaville through a series of what felt like random events, but as we look back, we know it was God's hand on our life.
The whole time, there were people praying, investing, and hoping we would join them here at the Father's house. They were preparing a place not just for their families, but for ours.
Those seeds sown have created a place for our family, for our kids to grow in the gifts God has given them. And more than that, it's created a place where our kids are passionate about creating a space for their friends and family that are far from God. There is nothing better than watching our kids as they lead worship and prayer and talk about Jesus in the most convincing and faith-filled ways. We've watched them pray for miracles and seen them come to pass. And there's truly nothing like it. And it's all because people before us who sacrificed, prayed, and gave God their surrendered yes.
Now it's our turn to sow seeds, to sacrifice, to invest in the next generation. Not just for our kids, but their friends, for our extended family, for young adults that are walking the same path we once did.
We know God is not done. We know how much He can do with a surrendered heart. We are going to keep pushing, keep pursuing, and pave a way for those we know He is drawing in. It didn't start with us, and it's not going to end with us.
Come on. Hey, can we give it up for Pastor Heather? That was awesome. Woo! Man, our kids are in good hands. Thank you, Pastor Heather, for you and Peter and all that you do. I do want to give a quick precursor today. Yesterday, my kids were begging me to jump on the trampoline with them. So, of course, I went and jumped with them. But I'm at that age where jumping on the trampoline can be a great liability. And at some point while jumping, something got tweaked and my neck tightened up. So if I look a little bit uptight up here, it's because I was jumping on the trampoline with my kids. But man, I'm so grateful to be able to speak to you this morning because Next Generations is something I'm so passionate about. And I think the Bob story was absolutely powerful because what it encompasses is that legacy is not just limited to your direct family, but your legacy can spread to so many people so far beyond even your family. I want to encourage you today. Maybe you don't have kids. Maybe your kids are grown out of the house. Maybe you haven't even started that journey yet. Right now in your life, you have the opportunity to leave a legacy. Every single person here, as a follower of Christ, we are called to leave a legacy. You see, God's plans and purposes, just like Pastor Heather said, are always revealed one generation to the next. God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's God's plan. That's His desire, but it's not guaranteed. It's not guaranteed. You see, after Jacob, we see that his kids actually found themselves living in the land of Egypt. For 400 years, they became enslaved to the Egyptians, and it wasn't until God called Moses to bring them out of slavery, and God used Moses. He did all these miracles. He split the Red Sea. They walked on dry ground. He provided food from heaven, water from the rock, and Jacob's descendants saw the miracles of God. And then Joshua took over and they stepped into the promised land that God had for them. And they continued to see miracles. The walls of Jericho fell down, victory after victory after victory. And then after Joshua's generation, they found themselves finally in a safe and beautiful place. No battles to be fought. And the next generation rose up. You see, Joshua's generation had kids. And then his kids got to live in the benefits of the faith journey that they walked through. And they began to hear stories about all the amazing things God had done. And then we find ourselves in Judges chapter 2. And something very interesting happens in Judges chapter 2. I want to read this. It says this, "And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that He had done for Israel." You need to see what happened here. See, God's plan is one generation to the next, but it's not guaranteed because there is a generation that experienced the miracles of God. Then there was a generation that was living in the benefits of the miracles of God, but they only heard about it. They never experienced it for themselves. And then after them, so quickly, there was a generation that did not even know God. In the span of a generation and a half, it went from miracles and experiencing God's glory and stepping out in faith to a generation having no idea who God was. You see, to run this race well called life, we must understand the type of race we're running. You see, a lot of people live life as if they're running a sprint, living for the moment, what feels good, living in the right now. But we were not created to run a sprint. Some people live their life as if they're running a marathon. It's like, okay, I'm going to run this life well. I'm going to get to the end. It's going to be great. But the thing about a marathon, it starts with you and it ends with you. And you could acquire everything, but we weren't created to run a marathon. See, the type of race you were created to run and God designed you to run is a relay race. It didn't start with us, but the danger is it could end with us if we're not careful. Because we see in Judges that although the generations had passed the baton, somewhere the baton stopped getting passed. So as a church, we are going to take responsibility for passing on that baton. Because this is the race we were created to run. Because if we are not intentional about passing on the baton, we will lose the next generation. It does not happen by accident, and it does not happen haphazardly. It does not happen passively. It is something we must actively pursue after, is leaving a legacy, living beyond ourselves. Because here's what you must understand. The enemy is out to get the next generation. If he can't get you, he'll go after the next generation. Because if he can get the next generation, then he can stop the promises of God being carried on. We're seeing it in today's culture. It's so evident more than ever that the enemy is out to get the next generation. It's nothing new. Pharaoh tried to take out the baby boys in Exodus, and then in Jesus' time we see Herod trying to kill the children. Why? Because if they could take out the children, then they could take out the future. Do not be deceived. We are in a spiritual battle, and the enemy is out to get the kids. They'll do whatever it takes to take the life of the next generation. And if they can't do it physically, the enemy will attack their mind, attack their identity, attack their peace and their joy. And this week at youth, we had our youth fill out commitment cards. And we asked them 3 questions. One of the questions was, what is something you need to lay down? And I was reading through those this week, and it would break your heart to see what young people are dealing with today. So much anxiety, so much depression, suicidal tendencies and thoughts. So many cards talking about their broken homes, the father who's left, eating disorders, all these different things, and it's just an attempt of the enemy to try to stop the promises of God. But not on our watch. Not in this house. Not while we have anything to do about it. Because the enemy might have plans to take out the next generation, but God's promises and plans are always greater. God's promises and plans never end. And I want to let you know, as the youth pastor, we are taking responsibility to hand on that baton and pass it on to the next generation. We were created to live beyond ourselves. So how do we do this? How do we pass on that baton well? First and foremost, you have to experience God for yourself. You personally have to have a personal experience with God. There was a generation that never experienced the miracles. They just heard about it. Because they never experienced it, they didn't pass it on. You cannot pass on something you haven't experienced yourself. You need to hear me today. It is caught more than it's taught. You could try to drop your student off every week on Wednesday nights or put them in kids' class. But if you haven't experienced it yourself, if you haven't lived through it yourself, if you haven't walked that faith journey with Jesus yourself, it will be very hard to pass it on. You were created to experience the beauty of Jesus firsthand. And I want to let you know this today. Maybe you've never experienced the forgiveness and grace and love of Jesus Christ. I want to let you know right now, you can start a new journey today. You can start running a new race right now. And you can step into the life which Jesus has called you to live. Why? Because he gave everything for you. He died on the cross and rose again, that if we would put our faith in him, we could experience him firsthand. Have you experienced the miracle power of Jesus? Have you experienced his presence? Have you seen him do miracles in your life? Because if we want to pass it on, we have to experience it firsthand. I remember when we had our first Jack, and the moment he was born, he turned 7 in May, 7 years ago. The moment he was born, something shifted in my life. And if you're a parent, you've experienced this before, or hopefully you've experienced this. Before that moment, my whole goal of my life was, how can I fulfill the dreams of God for my life? Like, that's all I thought about. I want to try to fulfill the purpose of God for my life. The moment Jack took his first breath, I stopped thinking about that completely, and I started thinking, how can I help Jack fulfill the purposes of God for his life? The moment I became a parent, my focus shifted beyond myself. The same thing should happen when you enter into a relationship with Jesus. No longer are we thinking about ourselves, but we start to live beyond for the next. Who am I passing this on to? Why? Because that's the heart of Christianity. God so loved the world that he gave. Jesus' heart and vision was always beyond. He wanted to reach those who were far from him. And so as followers of Jesus, we live the same way. We should start living beyond ourselves. The sad thing is that some people never move past themselves in their life. They never live beyond. And they're missing out on the purpose of why they were created. We were created to pass it on, to live beyond. If we want to pass it on, we have to experience it first ourselves. We have to live it out ourselves. The second thing we need to do is build a place where the next generation can have that experience. I love this verse in 2 Timothy. Paul's writing to the young man Timothy, and he says this: I am reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and then in your mother Eunice, and now I'm sure dwells in you as well. For this reason, I remind you to fan into flames the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of hands. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. I love this generational picture that Paul gives. He says it didn't start with you, Timothy. It actually started in your grandmother. Just like Pastor Heather's story, a decision. Grandmother, mother, and now dwells in you. So therefore, I urge you to fan into flame the gift of God which was given to you through the laying on of hands. Why are we building this building? What does this building represent? It represents a place and a space where our young people can have an experience with God and then grow into their identity, their gifting, and their calling. This is what happens in that verse. Timothy, at some point, had an experience. What does Paul say? The gift that was given to you through the laying on of hands. There was a transfer. There was a moment where he experienced God in such a real, intangible way, where someone prayed for him, where he went to the altar, where he had that moment. That's what we're doing for our youth. We want to create a space where they have that moment. We see it at camps. We see it at conferences. One of my favorite moments is the altar call where we begin to pray for kids. We're laying hands on them. And all of a sudden, they're laying down those burdens, those weights, and they're catching the dream that God has for them. It's a moment of experience. And then he says to fan into flame. Fan into flame the gift. What is that? It's the process of growing into the gifts that have been placed on the inside of you. That's what we want to see for the next generation. We want to pass it on. We want them to experience it. And then we want them to grow and develop and discover who they are, who God has created them to be. We want to speak the truth of God over them. Not let culture decide who they're going to be, not let culture define their dreams and hopes, but we are going to fan that into flame. And we're going to speak over them. God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. This is the generation that is being raised up. And this is what that building represents. A place where they can encounter God's presence and grow in their gift. I want to show you some pictures of the new building. I know Pastor Dave has a bit of a precursor. These are renderings. And so as we're in the building process, things are going to get changed. Things are in flux. Things are moving. And so this is the building on the outside. Here's what I want you to imagine. As you're walking into worship, as you're coming into church, your middle schoolers are going to be walking into the building that was designed and created for them. This is the cafe. And then here is the auditorium. They're going to show you those pictures. This is what the auditorium is going to look like. Every week, middle schoolers are going to be worshiping God, being raised up, trained, taught the truth of God's word, empowered, delivered, set free. Worship teams being raised up, future preachers being raised up. And so this is going to be a middle school service on Sundays. And then on Wednesday nights, we're going to have a high school specific service where they're encountering Jesus, growing. Not only that, a few other exciting things we want to use the building for. Another thing we want to use the building for is we're creating more room in our Kids Men. You know, there might be space in this auditorium right now, but Kids Men is completely full. We need more space right now. And so we're creating more space for that. And then another cool thing we want to do is we want to partner with parents who are choosing to homeschool their kids. And we want to create a space and a place where we can partner with you. Because we're not leaving the future of our kids up to chance. We're taking responsibility for it. So those are pictures of the building, but let me show you the building that I see. I see that building as a training ground of the future. I see that building as a place where future generations, future businessmen and women, future politicians, future doctors, future pastors, future worship leaders are discovering who they are, being raised up and trained. I see a place of peace that the moment kids step in there, all anxiety and depression is broken off. I see a place where young kids can get a vision for their life beyond their current circumstance. I see a place where identity is instilled and that demonic spirit of confusion that is attacking the next generation is broken off. I see a place where the next generation is being raised up. This is what we are building. This is what we are building for. This is the baton we are passing on. This is why we are doing it. It cannot stop with us. It cannot end with us. This is what we are building. And I want to end with this scripture. Worship team can come up. It says this, 1 Corinthians 3, 5 through 15. It says, according to the grace of God given to me, like a skilled master builder, I laid a foundation and someone else is building upon it. Let each one take care how he builds upon it. For no one can lay a foundation other than that which has been laid, which is Jesus Christ. So what is Paul saying? We're building on a foundation. Jesus is the foundation. Can I say this? When it comes to passing on to the next generation, keep the main thing the main thing. The fact that Jesus Christ was God, died on the cross, rose again, and he gives us new life. He's the foundation of everything. If your focus goes on anything other than Jesus, we might be missing it. So we're all building upon this foundation. Verse 12, now if anyone builds on this foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, or straw, each one's work will become manifest. It will be tested. For the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. If the work that anyone has built on the foundation survives, he will receive a reward. But if anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer the loss, though he himself will be saved, but only through fire. What is this talking about? In the end, all of us will pass on to eternity. Just like Pastor Heather said, what will go with us to eternity? The only definition of success that I see from this verse when it comes to the life that we're building, the race that we're running, is this: will it last beyond us? The only definition of success: will it last beyond me? Am I building something that will make it through the fire? Or am I just building for the now, for the moment, to get more? People are eternal. And when we choose to build people, when we choose to build the next generation, when we choose to build something beyond ourselves, we're building into the eternal. These buildings will be gone one day. The building we're building one day will be gone. But what we are building with will last for eternity. We're not building with wood, straw, and clay. A lot of people build their lives with those types of materials. Materials that are easy to find and easy to access and cheap. We are choosing to build with something much greater that will last through the fire. See, the thing about building with gold, silver, and precious stones, it is not easy, or everyone would be doing it. Building for legacy, building for eternity takes sacrifice. It takes time. It takes energy to pass on what's been entrusted to us. But it's worth it because it will last for eternity. And even this week, as we get prepared to bring our commitments next week to the building, it's going to take sacrifice. It's not going to be easy. But we're building with gold, silver, and precious stones. We're building into the eternal. We're building something that will last. And we're not going to let it stop with us. This week, we filled out commitment cards as youth, and we had 143 kids fill out cards. It was spring break, so we're about half the size we normally are. But they filled out cards, and we asked the students, hey, what do you want to sacrifice and what do you want to give financially? Because it's a lie to think that students don't have money. Nike knows that they have money. Whether or not it's theirs or yours, you can't tell the difference. But we told our students, hey, this isn't just a story that your parents are living. This is something I want you to experience. So I told them, hey, as a youth ministry, we're going to step out first, and we're going to step into the unknown, and we're going to bring our sacrifice to God. So I told them over the course of the next 2 years, what can God give through you? It was amazing, 143 students. And I told them, hey, I don't want you to write any number that you can't. Let's take this seriously. Let's give God our best. 143 students committed to giving $32,000, $222 last week. Because they're stepping out and saying, God, I don't want this to just be my parents. I want to experience this for myself. Me and Sierra are so excited to step out in this journey of sacrifice. Because I grew up hearing my parents tell stories all the time of, I remember when we put God to the test. My dad tells a story of when I was 3 years old and I had a brother who was 1, he felt called to go plant a church in Seattle with Pastors Wendell and Jenny Smith. No promise of a job, no promise of a financial future, but he felt the call of God. And so he moved his family from Missouri to Seattle with 2 kids. Sounds a little bit reckless to me. But he took a step of faith because he didn't want to just talk about it. He wanted to live it and experience it. And to see that one step of faith has affected my life completely. And so me and Sierra are even praying and believing, God, what do you want to do through us? Because we don't want to just hear about it. We want to live it. We want to experience it. Why? So we could pass it on to our kids. And so here's our heart behind this. If you call the Father's house home, we want 100% of us to participate in passing on this baton. It's not about an amount, but it's about a surrendered heart, and it's about sacrifice. And so this week, I want to encourage you, get your journey guide. Go through the how-to section, be praying, God, what do you want to do through me? Because what he's doing through you and what we are building is eternal. It didn't stop with us, and it didn't start with us, and it's not gonna stop with us. God's not done, so we're not done. And I believe what God's gonna do through you is so amazing. And maybe you haven't seen the dreams of God fulfilled in your lifetime. I believe that you will see them fulfilled through your lifeline and through your family and through who's coming next. Are you gonna pass it on? Are you gonna pass it on? We're building for eternity. We're building for the future.